Hello and welcome to the Artful Rodger. I'm your host, Loretta Lynn Rodger, and on today's episode, I'll show you what I like to call an encouragement book. Though my book is one of encouragement, you may need your book for a different theme. Maybe you've got some recipes you'd like to share. This is a great way to do it. Not to mention, make it into a little mini scrapbook and give Grandma some pictures of that grandbaby. You're only limited by your own imagination. When you are choosing your base material, be sure that it's going to hold up to wear and tear, as well as be easy to punch through with a handheld punch, and it will hold up with a lot of glue on it. I do not recommend using something like a frozen meal box. They're a lot thicker than, say, a cereal box would be for this type of project. They're also really slick and they're hard to punch through, so just not a good choice. Here are just a few examples of the types of materials you can use to cover your base pieces. Everything from scrapbooking paper to wrapping paper. You can use greeting cards. You can use sheet music. You can use Grandma's old lace. You can use just about anything you want. You just need to keep in mind that if it's a thicker material, it's going to require a little bit different handling. And it's also going to require some extra glue, maybe some decoupage medium, things of that nature. Here are a few pictures of items that I like to use as the covers for my base pieces. As I mentioned earlier, my book's going to be one of encouragement. There are some things that you need to keep in mind. One is the size of your book. Mine is basically 4 by 5 inches. Just think of it as a fancy rectangle that has 2 corners cut off of it. This in mind, it will be easier for you not only to cut it, but to duplicate it in a way in which it's going to be easy and consistent to use. The first way of cutting the base pieces is to use a straight edge and a pencil and mark 4 by 5 inches. Using these straight lines, then you can go back and cut it down to size. You're going to want to take some heavier duty scissors for the cutting. When you have your lines all marked out and you're using your scissors, make sure you stay just on the inside of the line while cutting this out. You may also wish to have your book shaped a different way, maybe a circle. Maybe you want an oval shape of your book. The possibilities of how to do this are really endless. You just need to keep in mind how big it is so that when you're ready to do the decorating and putting things like verses, recipes, or things of that nature inside of your book, it will be consistent throughout. You may also use a template for the base of your book. When I made my template, I cut it out of a sturdier chipboard piece so that I can use it over and over. The best thing about this part is that it is reusable. And that means that every piece is going to be consistently the same size, shape, and all that good stuff. So it'll be easy to get them all cut out. You'll once again want to take those heavier duty scissors to cut your tag shaped pieces out. This is my favorite way of cutting the chipboard pieces for the tags. I'm using a bypass trimmer that I purchased from a big box store. I've also gone ahead and used a Sharpie marker to delineate 2 45-degree angles so that every single tag that I cut out will be exactly the same. The first thing you'll do is cut these down to 4 by 5 inches, and then you're going to line up the corner with your 2 markings and take off either one of the corners. The easiest way way to have consistent corners is once you cut the first one, use that little scrap, flip it around to the opposite side, and cut it off of the base piece. I would like to make a note really quickly that I marked the center of these before I started so that I knew where to punch the hole for my tag shape. You'll want to do the same thing. If you punch the holes as you go along, it ensures that they're in the same place every single time. This is yet another way to cut those corners so that they're consistent. I used my template and a couple of clothespins to hold it into place onto another piece of chipboard. Of course, this one once again is measured to 4 by 5 inches, and using those scissors, I'm just going to cut off the corners. That's it. It's that simple. I've also gone ahead and cut all of my pattern paper pieces for this project out. Just as with the chipboard pieces, I've lined up the 4 by 5 inch rectangles, and I'm using a pair of sturdy scissors to cut off the corners. Once those corners are cut, I will measure and mark, then punch out the holes for the center of my tags. As you can see, I once again used those clothespins. They can be such a time saver in the craft room. They hold stuff together while it dries. They keep stuff from moving around while you're trying to cut it. I cannot tell you how wonderful they really are. When you're getting ready to glue your pieces together, you're going to want to use a really good glue. This is just school glue, PVA glue, whatever you want to call it. I'm also going to be bringing in some acetate to protect the covers of my book, but I'll get into that in just a little while. I actually used a small container I had sitting around to pour my glue into. For one thing, it's not a glass, so that means it's harder to tip over, and it doesn't hold that much, so it's pretty easy. I like using a paintbrush just because it's smaller and easier to work with. Of course, you can use a bigger brush, or you can use a foam brush. The only problem is they can be a little sloppy. I am using my small paintbrush to apply this glue to the outside edge of the pattern paper as well as the cardstock base. I just prefer to do it this way. It's a lot easier, and if you try to use something like a tape runner, then the problem is that it will peel up a lot easier, but once it's down, it's down. Where with glue you have a little bit more of an open time. This step is totally optional, but I pretty much do it with every project that I make. Just like you, my eyes are getting a little weaker as I get older. Sometimes I don't cut stuff straight, or I'm just tired and things don't come out the way I want to. If you just use a cosmetic sponge or whatever you have on hand and some dye-based ink to sponge around the edges of your tags once they are glued down, then it's going to hide all of those imperfections and look a lot more finished and professional. I like to just take my ink and smoosh it around the edges. You can also flick it, whatever you like to do. While I was cutting my base pieces, I grabbed some acetate to use as a cover for my book. This way it will hold up to wear and tear over time, and it just really looks nice. For this part of the project, you're going to layer on a very thick layer of your glue, and then you're going to use a squeegee or something else of that nature, go from the middle to the outside corners, and get out any of the excess glue. This way the acetate will adhere completely down smoothly. Once you have this done, you can do it to both the front and back covers, by the way. You'll want to put it aside and let it dry. I'm using a book binding ring for my project. These are pretty relatively available. You can buy them at your big box stores. They come in different colors and sizes. Mine happens to be about 1.5 inches. I'm going to open it up, put it through the holes in my tags, and close it. Now that everything is glued down, cut out, and put together, let's have some fun with the decoration. can address the inside of your book however you'd like. For the one that I am going to show you today, I did choose some scriptures. I kept in mind the size of my book, printed those out. You can also sponge those edges, of course. But you can also use other things like sticker books from your big box store and theme it in a way that meets your requirements. When you're putting your elements into your book, it doesn't always have to be straight. You can put it at an angle. It is your project. Make it your own. I am also using the same glue as I used for putting the pages together to put these into place. The scriptures I chose for my book are Isaiah 40:31, John 14:27, Romans 15:13, Proverbs 5 and 6. You can also use Psalms 19:14 and John 15:4. Now it's time to decorate the front cover. I'm using a few drops of E6000 to add some flowers that I picked out in the same color family as my book. I'm going to use my good old clothespins to hold those in place while it sets up and dries. You could also use hot glue to attach your elements. However, it's plastic. I don't recommend doing that. To give it that really finished, polished look, I'm going to use some lace and ribbon from my supply. If you don't have any, ask your mom, your grandma, your aunt. I'm sure you can find some remnants. You're just going to want to tie these through that book binding ring, but be sure that you don't put so much on your ring that it won't open. After you put these into place, you're going to want to go ahead and be sure your book is actually not sealed closed. If you see any excess glue, use your baby wipe and wipe that off. I am going to also put a couple of charms on my book. I just strung these up with a little bit of jute twine, and I'm going to tie those into place. Here is our project all finished. Thank you for joining me today for this episode of the Artful Rodger. I am your host, Loretta Lynn Rodger. Here are some still pictures of today's project, along with a few others of a similar nature.